One of the most famous phrases in all of moviedom is young Robert De Niro looking in the mirror and saying, "You talking to me?" Well, that's the question that we've got for God today, and God is saying with an unequivocal yes, I'm talking to you. The question is, are we listening? And do we know how to hear the voice of God when God speaks? Last week we had Adam and Eve who disobeyed God. They didn't listen to the command that God had given to them, and of course we know what the results of that was. Today we've got just the opposite. We've got one who obeyed God. Obedere in Latin means simply to listen. He listened to God, and this man who's half dead, he's 75 years old, he's ready for retirement. He's taken off, leaving for a land he knows not where. He's leaving his family, he's leaving his security. Why? He's being called. Our young seminarian today talked about the fact that he was called. And it's an adventure. We are called to this adventure with one goal, and the goal is life. It's the fullness of life, not just the fullness of life today, or when we die, it's the fullness of life beginning right now. If we are willing to walk out on faith and hear the voice of God. Today, we've got Peter and James and John going up the mountain. Now the mountain, they're going to have a mountaintop experience. The whole purpose of the mountain is to come in communion with God. You're going up and God's coming down to meet. It's the trysting place between ourselves and our God. Well, they're up there and all of a sudden this revelation happens to them. And their eyes are opened and they begin to see. What do they see? They see who Jesus really is. Jesus really is the glory of God in human form. They are beside themselves. Peter doesn't know what he's saying. He wants to make a booth for Moses and Elijah. It's like an Irish wake. He wants to keep the party going. He doesn't know what else to say. And all of a sudden, boom, the voice comes down from the cloud. Names who Jesus is. This is my son. Now. And here's the message. Listen to him. Listen to him. And what's his message? It is not an easy message. As they're coming down the mountain, he says, tell the vision to no one until the Son of Man rises from the dead. And then he goes on to say what Peter never wants to hear. As a matter of fact, Jesus calls Peter a Satan because he doesn't want to hear what has to happen to the Son of Man. The Son of Man is going to be rejected. Do you hear that? He's going to come to obstacles that will be almost impossible to overcome. He will be turned over to the authorities. He will be crucified. He will die. On the third day he rose. Can you hear that? Can you hear that? And are you willing to follow that? That's the great question for each and every one of us, because he's speaking not just to the disciples, he's speaking to us in the pattern that the disciples are going to have to go through, and everyone's going to go through the same pattern. No one is exempt from the pattern. If we're really hearing the voice of God, we're going to follow the same pattern. As a matter of fact, that's what St. Paul is saying to Timothy in the second reading today. The opening line is, Timothy, you're going to have to bear your share of the burdens, of the pain, of the obstacles, of the sin, which the gospel entails. The ancients used to say that the reason that Jesus manifested himself so beautifully to the disciples was to prepare them for the sweating of his blood on the cross. It was to prepare them for the journey that each and every one has to make. And no one is exempt. So God is speaking. The question is, you talking to me? The question is, are we listening? And I think it's only fair to ask, how is God speaking? You know, my favorite saying, and I say it at every funeral, I say it at every wedding, I say it at every chance I get in the divine conversation between our God and ourselves. God speaks first. It's a conversation that begins at the moment of our conception, goes on for all of eternity. Now, how do we hear the voice of God? And where do we hear the voice of God? Well, obviously, we hear the voice of God in the Scriptures. And our whole job is to unpack this word, because it's a sacred text. A sacred text is something that every time you read it, you're seeing something different. It's a diamond. There are so many facets to it. And every time I pick up the Scriptures and I'm immersed in a sacred text, I'm seeing something I've never seen before. The job is to unpack it, and then how is it relevant for my life today? What in the world is this whole text about listening to the voice of God saying to you and saying to me today? Another place that we hear the voice of God, and especially we as Catholics, is in what's called the magisterium. The magisterium is the teaching office of the church. That's the College of Cardinals and the bishops in communion with our Holy Father. And so when the Pope speaks, pay attention. Pay attention. And our Holy Fathers throughout all of the centuries have said some incredibly wonderful things that are relevant for our life today. Are those the only two places that God speaks? No. God speaks, well, through the world in which we live, through our environment. Elijah was up on the mountain trying to hear the voice of God. He could not hear it in the whirlwind. He could not hear it in the earthquake. He could not hear it in the thunder and the lightning. And then the gentle breeze came and God spoke. Well, we're going through all kinds of things in our environment today. Is it fair to ask, through what the tornadoes and the melting ice caps and all that's going on in our world, is God speaking to us? And if He is, what is He saying? What is He saying? And we're called to wrestle with that. There are not a bunch of simple answers to all of that, but we are also called to respond to that. If the creation of God, if God is in His creation, if creation is God's footprint, then we need to pay attention to what's going on in God's creation. And I think most of all, though, that God, on an individual and a corporate basis, speaks through events. The events in my life and the events in the life of the world in which we live. And right now we're going through one major event that is worldwide, which I really believe, in one way, if we look at it properly, God is speaking. And of course, the event is viral. And it's going viral. You know, in computer language, when we talk about something going viral, it means it spreads. It spreads all over the place, and it spreads rapidly. Well, there's a virus going around, and it seems to be spreading very, very rapidly. And the question for us is, if God is speaking through this, what is He trying to say to us, and how are we supposed to respond? One of the responses that I am convinced that we are not supposed to respond to is in panic. Panicking is going to do us no good at all, and we just see panic all over the place. He is saying, pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on. Now, there are two kinds of viruses. There's the coronavirus, which is going around right now, which causes a great deal of damage. But there's another kind of virus, too, that's a good virus, and it spreads, too. We often said that the church became the church. People became Christians almost virally by being in contact with other Christians. Now, the great saying was, see how these Christians love one another. It is an infectious ease, not a dis-ease as the coronavirus is, but this is an ease. Our young seminarian this morning was telling us how was he infected by his pastor, by his parents, and that's viral as well. The thing is that we have to sometimes go through one to get to the other. We need to go through, and it's part of that process that Jesus is preparing us for. If we want to see the glory, if we want to see the beauty, and it's in there, we're going to have to go through the obstacle course, through the cross. So often that cross, and that's where we as a world right now are enduring a cross. And what's interesting about this virus, and I think what God is speaking to us through this virus that's going on right now, is that it's literally viral. It doesn't know any boundaries. doesn't know any tribe, doesn't know any politics, doesn't know any ideology, doesn't know any religion. It's an equal opportunity infector. And countries that really hate each other are all being infected with the same virus. From China to India to Iran to Italy to right here in Illinois. What is that saying about us? We who create so many boundaries against each other. And as you've heard me say before, I think the sin of this generation is this hard line boundary that we have against each other in our opposition to each other. I think that's the modern sin of the world that we are all caught in. This is asking us to go beyond our boundaries because we're all in the same boat. Now, there are some who are in the boat who has more holes in it, and those are the poor among us, and the people in the poorest countries are going to suffer by far the most, and for some reason they are the ones who almost always are called to be the instruments of transformation and the instruments of salvation. In many ways, we are the luckiest of all, or the most grace-filled of all the people. And so we are asked now to respond. How do we respond? Well, St. Paul puts it this way: where obstacles, sin abounds, grace will superabound. I don't know if we can call the coronavirus sinful, but it certainly is an obstacle, and it certainly is something that can certainly debilitate many people and kill some people. Now, where's the grace? Where's the grace? How do we respond to this? Ideologies separate. Grace unites. If we are all in the same boat, if this dis-ease knows no boundaries, can we have an ease, a healing that also knows no boundaries? Can we do what St. John Paul laid down his life for, called us to do? And that is simply to live in solidarity with each other, knowing that we are one with each other. That's the great reality. These divisions between us are man-made and often sinful. And when we are able to know that we are in the same boat and called to live into solidarity forever, we begin to hear the voice of God clearly. And the voice of God most clearly was spoken through Jesus when he says, "Here's my prayer. Here's what I want for the world. That all may be one. That all may be one. Period. Full stop." And we're all part of that. We're all invited to participate in that. Will we have to go through the cross? I'm sorry, no one's exempt. But what's on the other side? What did we see on the mountain? What are we called to see in each other? What are we called to see in ourselves? You talking to me? You better believe I'm talking to you.